Hi there, and welcome to the Green Shoe Conversation, Episode 7. I'm Stephanie Cochran. I'm the Executive Director for the Green Shoe Foundation. We are a mental health organization that we do a 5-day intensive outpatient retreat for adults 21 and older. And with me, I've got some of my team members here. I've got Ms. Teresa Deck, our Clinical Director.
Hello.
And Mr. Stephen Brinkworth, one of our therapists. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today.
Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Well, anytime. Over the last couple weeks, we've kind of been talking about one of our core issues with our model, and that's boundaries. And we've talked a lot about what boundaries are, where we learned boundaries. And last week, we spent some time talking about how to set boundaries, and then also how sometimes if we have those walls put up too, on how to reconnect with people and let those down. But one of the things that you guys talked a lot about was our talking, listening, boundary technique. And I know that is something that we use here at Green Shoe during the retreat week with all of our participants, correct?
Yes, it is.
And we also use it personally in our personal lives. And I know, especially even as a team, that has been such a valuable tool for us, and just in communicating with each other and working with each other. So today I wanted to turn the podcast over to you, Teresa, and you and Steve really spend some time actually teaching that tool. This is something great for anybody who has been through a Green Shoe retreat, or for anyone who is just kind of wanting a great communication technique on how to set boundaries, and then also just how to communicate with people. So Teresa, the show is yours.
All right, thank you. To start off with, boundaries helps us in our relationships and a way of communicating in our relationships. Those relationships could be with a significant other, it could be with our boss, it could be with our children, it could be with the person at the grocery store. So it's a system of setting limits and being able to share who you are and allowing other people to share who they are without taking things personally. So it's a system of setting limits for protection and containment during intimacy. And intimacy, when we talk about intimacy, we're talking about being known and letting people know who you are. And so it's about being curious about who someone else is, and also being willing to tell other people who you are, and accepting that there's a difference. Steve and I were just talking yesterday about self and not self. And this is what the talking, listening boundary helps you define. This is who I am, and this is what I think and feel, and I can listen to you and understand who you are and what you think and feel. I don't always have to agree. That's okay, but I can understand, and it creates a healthy communication between individuals. So, and we're expressing our reality. We talk a lot about reality in our week, and that's one of the core issues. And our reality is what we think and what we feel and how we behave. So we're expressing through this talking, listening boundary, our reality, and we're accepting the reality of other people, and that we don't get to choose for other people how they feel or what they think, because we have that self and not self, again, setting that boundary. So the boundaries are internal and external. The physical boundaries protects our bodies and our sexuality, but the internal boundaries, emotional boundaries, that's what the talking, listening boundary is about. And so it helps us be relational without being offensive and without being offended. Right? So that's what the two parts about the internal boundary are, because, excuse me, we don't want to blame, we don't want to take on the blame, we don't want to shame, we don't want to keep score, we don't want to have a winner-loser, right or wrong, demand for fairness, and we don't want to feel threatened or threaten someone else. So the words that we say and that we hear sometimes can feel threatening. So how do we set healthy boundaries for ourselves to protect and contain us, and then with someone else? So that's what, when Steve and I are going to teach you this talking, listening boundary, those are some of the basics about the information about the talking, listening boundary, the emotional boundaries, because boundaries, what they do is they help us keep maintain our value system, and they also protect our safety. Because sometimes people might say something that might want to harm us, and so we need to protect ourselves. And they're functional, healthy internal boundaries. They communicate respect and compassion for ourselves and for other people. And if we lived in a dysfunctional family when we were growing up and didn't learn, Stephanie, you talked about that a minute ago, that where we learned our boundaries is in our families. How were we treated? How were we spoken to? Were we allowed to talk about what we thought and felt? And so those boundaries we talk about are in extremes. See, we talk about the shut down and the walled up boundaries. And so do you have something that you might want to share about those dysfunctional, inappropriate boundaries, what those look like?
I think one thing that stands out to me, I'll even use the talking boundary, as I hear you bringing this up and thinking about those extremes. The story I tell myself is how important it is for me to recognize what's going on internally,
Yes.
to recognize, am I getting ready to step past that boundary? Am I shutting down and building that wall? So about that, I feel some pain, I feel some joy. I've experienced both of those. So another piece that comes to mind thinking about those walls, I have learned that people or certain conversations even aren't safe. And so I hear reminders or I see reminders of what that is, I build that wall and shut down, which keeps me from being able to have meaningful, healthy, functional relationships with people. And I don't have those boundaries present. I've talked to somebody recently about growing up in a home where everybody was safe. And I didn't see anybody that wasn't safe. And so didn't learn what it was like to set healthy boundaries with people because there wasn't that experience of the offensiveness. And in doing so now, it feels really foreign and not knowing where to set that boundary. So they've been more prone to violate other people's boundaries because they didn't know where they existed, didn't know where they were. And so that internal awareness of what those walls, what those no boundaries look like for us, we're working towards coming from a place of balance more and more every day.
Good thoughts. And those extremes and where we learn them, the extreme of oversharing and giving too much information, or just withdrawing and not being able to talk about what you think and feel because it wasn't safe. Safety is a huge issue, whether you felt safe in your family of origin, and now do you feel safe? And if those boundaries were never tested, you didn't know how to set healthy boundaries. And the talking listening boundary that we're going to teach, it seems very strange at first because it's the opposite kind of what you think when you're listening to somebody else. It's trying to find out who they are. It's not about what you're thinking, but it's listening to find out who they are. Steve mentioned that. It's internal. What's going on with me? Because nobody can make me feel angry or sad or happy. It's my own experience. And so we use the talking listening boundary, to help express our experience, our internal experience of what's going on. So our goal is to teach you how to use this talking listening boundary because it focuses the communication on you and what's coming up with you, and not the other person. So many individuals coming through our retreat say, oh, well, that seems selfish. That's because we have been taught to focus on everybody else and not ourselves. We need to pay attention to what's coming up with us so we can share who we are and not be influenced by somebody else. So we're going to have a step-by-step guide on how to use this format. So Stephanie, I'll have you put up the first slide about the listening boundary. Okay, so when you see on your screen here where it says talking about the listening boundary, what we want you to notice, there's breathe up there 3 times. That's because energy and our emotions are energy, and we have to express them. And so if we start feeling something when somebody's talking, when we're listening, this is the listening boundary, we want to be able to keep breathing and say, I notice that I'm starting to feel angry, or I'm starting to feel sad or happy or glad, whatever it is. So remind yourself that the other person is talking to be known, about being intimate. They're just telling you what they're thinking and feeling. So we're listening to find out of curiosity, who are they? What do they think? What do they feel? And we want you to look directly at the person you're talking to, if possible, and say to yourself, I'm simply finding out who this person is. And listen to the person's thoughts and decide. You don't have to agree. You can take that information in and decide, that's not what I think. That's not how I feel. It can be, you can agree and say, yes, I agree with that. Or I need some more information. There are 3 choices. And if you have trouble, because so many of us, when we're listening to somebody, what we want to do, and I know to catch myself doing this, I'm already coming up with my defense as to what I need to say because I'm disagreeing with them. And so we need to keep focused on listening. And I heard Pia talk the other day. She said, I would hold on to my ear. This would remind me my ear is my listening tool. We've got 2 of them and 1 mouth. So we listen with our ears. So look directly at them. That's the listening boundary of finding out who the other person is, not making any decisions, just out of curiosity, listening to the person. Anything else on that, Steve?
Teresa, as you mentioned the word curiosity, what that brings up for me is that as I listen with curiosity, pure curiosity, I don't have any judgments that I'm waiting to set down. I don't have any responses that I'm waiting to give. Just like you mentioned, I'm simply finding out who this person is. And that curiosity is up to being able to be present in a state of balance. It's a very mindful approach.
Yes, yes. And you have to practice mindfulness when you're listening. You have to be present in your body, and that means your focus. The front part of your brain, that cognitive part of your brain, is listening and taking in all the data, all the information. I'm listening. Okay.
I think another piece that comes up is that very first part that's on the slide, the breath.
Yes.
How important that breath is. And as I think about times that I've heard information that's been difficult, I notice for me that I might hold my breath.
Yes.
So my heart races, it increases that speed that it's pumping. And the way that I respond when I've held my breath is very different than if I allow that breath to move. So just like you were talking about that release and being able to have that energy move out, that breath also helps us stay present in a way that I'm able to be curious and not having that anticipation to respond or needing to place a judgment on what's going on, but being able to be present.
We're listening to find out. And then those 3 things, those 3 questions, do you agree? Do you not agree? Do you need more information? The next slide, Stephanie, that would be on when you're going to, would you go on to the 3rd one? To the, yes, your initial response after using that listening boundary, which I talked about. Is it true? And if it is, you have the same perception, and you're going to have, it may be sadness. It may, whatever emotion it is, you may agree and with what they express. If it's not true, you might say, I have a different perception. Would you like to hear that? Or the 3rd one is that questionable. I'm confused. I need more information. And state that just briefly. Don't go about that, because then we'll forget about what they said. Just, I need more information. Would you answer this for me? And then back to the talking. After you've listened, then we get to respond. All right? So this is the talking boundary format. Intimacy, again, sharing who you are and finding out who the other person is. So as we listened, we took in data, sensory information data, what we heard, and if we saw anything, if we felt anything. So that data is going up into our head, and the front part of our brain is going, what we need to respond with is, when I heard you say, and then you repeat briefly what you heard them say. When I heard you say that you went to the store today, and whatever else happened. And then what did you make up, or what did you believe, or what did you think about that? So it's your perception, your interpretation, what you're thinking, and your reality is. It's not about the other person. This is all about what came up for you when you were listening. And you're telling them what came up for you, what you thought, what you made up about that. It's not, I just made up something. It's, this is what I thought, because based upon my history, I'm making up that you didn't have a good time at the store today. So it's my thoughts though. It's not anything about what you said. And I'm not judging, or I'm not, it's all about what I made up about that, what I thought about that, and what I felt about that. That's next. And about that, I feel anger or shame or fear, whatever the emotion is. We have the emotions listed there. So this is how we talk, how we respond back to somebody after we've listened. Steve, do you want to give us a brief example every day, how this might happen and how this might look?
Sure. Yesterday, when you were discussing something that you had read, and we were talking about self and not self. I talked with you yesterday about that, but specifically in this situation, giving an example, as I listened to you talk about self and not self, the story I told myself was about a similar family situation that involved a discussion of someone not knowing the difference between now and not now. Mm. About that, I felt pain, because sometimes we may not know the difference between me and not me. And we might start to bring in that other piece of the other person and feel like they have control over my emotions. Thinking about having Zoom meetings with friends. One of the things that came up last night with a discussion with friends, everybody waved and identified, well, here's the Zoom wave. And as I saw that wave, what it brought up for me is how much I've missed being in person with people. We don't often sit with each other and wave unless someone's driving away or going away. And I missed that contact. And about that, I feel pain.
And I can respond. When I heard you talk about that wave and I saw you wave, what I think about that is we are in the same building and yet feeling very disconnected. And about that, I feel pain as well. And so I'm going to have my own responses, my own thoughts, my own feelings when I listen to you talk about your experience. So it is, again, treating ourselves with respect and compassion, not disagreeing or agreeing, but just saying, this is what you think and what you feel, and this is how I think and I feel. And I can have a different thoughts and have different feelings than you do. So it's a very effective way to communicate who you are and listening to who someone else is. So that's why we use it and why we teach it in our model, in our retreats at Green Shoe.
And Teresa, when I just hear you talk about this being such a great communication tool, what it brings up for me is what it's done just in my relationship with my family, and how it's helped in me slowing down in what I say and not making a quick judgment or making it be a right or wrong. And that, brings up compassion for me and joy, that by using this, it's just helped build stronger communications with my personal family and with my husband and my boys.
Absolutely. I also love Rebecca's, her example that she always uses. Do you want me to tell about that?
Tell her story.
So Rebecca talks every week in our retreat when she teaches about boundaries, about her interaction with her husband one day. She said this summer, because we've all been out doing a little more yard work and working in our yard because we haven't been in work as much. And so she had planted some irises, spent a long time planting these irises and was so proud of them. And her husband comes in one day and says, I don't like those irises. And instead of taking it personally, what she did was think about it and respond using the talking, listening boundary and ask him, what was his perception? Why don't you like those irises? Instead of, well, I did this and I spent a lot of time doing them and I love irises, and why don't you, instead of blaming and finding fault, she just said, was curious, I wonder why you don't like those irises. And he was able to share that he didn't like mowing around him, that they leaned over, they were in his way, and it was hard to do that. And so she was able to have a conversation where she could listen to him and share what she was needing to share with him. So, and in a talking listening, that use a talking listening boundary, not assume that she was taking things personally, that he didn't like how she had done them or he didn't like them. So.
Right. And I think we all, when I hear that, we all can really identify with how that conversation could have turned into an argument quickly.
Yes. And she could have taken it personally and gotten huffed off and marched off.
Absolutely. And I'm guilty of that. I've done that. So,
Absolutely.
I want to talk about one last example. And there was a conversation that we were all involved in a couple weeks ago. And this is an example, and I'm going to change it up just a little bit, that came up, but I thought it was so important, especially the way that you responded, Teresa, with the talking listening boundary, because I think this is happening in a lot of conversations today, in some tough and uncomfortable conversations. But we were practicing. This was just an example that somebody used about if I said, I really don't like people with blonde hair. I just think they all need to, be shipped off somewhere. And then you responded.
And I did. And I said, what came up for me when I heard that is my granddaughter has blonde hair and she's very precious to me. And when I heard you say that, I felt sad because of what you'd said, because my granddaughter, that was my perception and my thought process was, I love little blonde-headed little girls, and so I wouldn't want her to be shipped off somewhere. So that's my thought. And so who knows why they don't like, or why they have the thought that they don't like somebody with blonde hair, is that we have the right to say, what came up for me is when you said that, I felt pain because I thought of my granddaughter, and I have a right to that thought and feeling just as much as, because they may have had a mother that was blonde hair and she was abusive to them. Mm-hmm. So their perception of blonde hair is very different than my perception of blonde hair. So using that talking listening boundary.
But by not telling me that I was wrong and shutting me down, you've kept the conversation open for me to either share more, or now I've learned about you, and making that connection may help me rethink some things. Or again, use the talking listening boundary when, share what this brings up for me and the emotions. But the biggest part is it doesn't shut somebody down. It doesn't cut off the conversation.
They don't feel threatened when you say, well, I don't like you because you don't like people with blonde hair. Absolutely. We're making a judgment. We're not sharing what that brings up for us. Brought up pain for me and sadness, but I wasn't being critical and judgmental of the other person. And being curious. I wonder why you don't like people with blonde hair. Mm-hmm. What was your experience with people with blonde hair? Again, finding out who they are and sharing what you think about it.
In listening to the two of you discuss this, I'm also thinking about what happens as that conversation is over for us as an individual. And if I've used that listening boundary and I'm able to be curious, then I'm not walking away from this conversation carrying that pain or fear that I may have picked up, taking that personally. Mm-hmm. And so by being able to identify my reality and speak truth to my reality and share that and be known, just like Stephanie said, it helps keep that conversation open in a way that we both have a space to safely share our reality. And about that, I have a lot of hope.
Because we're not holding that pain or sadness or anger, like you said, Steve. We've released it. We've talked about it. And so we're not holding it. Because when we hold that and we don't release it by breathing or not being able to share it verbally, then it's all stays within inside. And that's what eats at us and keeps us unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you so much, you guys. This was wonderful. And again, such a fantastic tool. And again, I know it's something that we use throughout the retreat and it's very vital, but it's vital to us as a team. And that's, you know, what's so amazing with this. So again, I want to, Teresa, thank you so much for teaching us this. Steve, awesome as always. Appreciate you guys so much. I want to encourage everyone too that if you want more information about Green Shoe, I'm going to put up some information here that you can kind of find ways to contact us. We are at our website, greenshoe.org, but you can also get us through Facebook, through Instagram. We want to hear from you. So if you have any questions, any ideas that you would like to hear us discuss, please let us know through these, and or just send us an email at info.greenshoe.org. Again, thanks for joining us, and we will see you guys next week.